Can't even afford a decent pair of shoes. Rachel, guess nothing's changed since you left home. My father's voice cut sharply through the high-ceilinged lobby of Summit First Bank, each word shaped for maximum public impact. Conversations around us faltered as people turned. I tightened my grip on the strap of my messenger bag, grounding myself. The sting of old humiliation rose in me, familiar, but no longer overwhelming. I steadied my breath. I refused to give him the reaction he wanted. The place gleamed with corporate authority glass walls, polished fixtures, the low hum of transactions being processed. People moved with the quiet assurance of those used to being taken seriously. I felt the contrast acutely, not because of what I wore, but because of the years spent hearing the same refrain at home that Rachel Cole lacked direction, lacked promise, lacked everything. I glanced down at my shoes, the worn canvas sneakers I'd owned for 6 years. The fabric had softened to a fragile, familiar texture. The soles had thinned to almost nothing. They had carried me through job interviews midnight, deadlines, grocery runs when my bank account barely held enough to stay afloat. They were the one witness that never judged me. Why did they always cling to that idea? Why did being his daughter mean standing permanently in Ethan's shadow no matter how hard I worked? The comment about my shoes was only the latest performance in a long pattern. Harold Benton, the branch manager, approached with professional detachment. His attention flicked briefly toward my father's tailored suit, then toward me. I registered the quick assessment, the distracted glance of a man deciding whose needs would take priority. I'd seen it for years in many forms. Beside my father, Ethan folded his arms with smug expectation. He leaned in just enough for others to hear. Let me guess $2 in there if she hasn't spent it all on coffee. Someone behind us shifted with discomfort. Public tension makes people uneasy, and my family excelled at creating it. I could have spoken. I could have recited the explanations I once practiced in childhood proofs, evidence rational defenses. But I had learned that any explanation would be twisted into a flaw, another example of me being difficult. Silence protected me far better now. My purpose today was simple: raise my transaction limit before a major corporate transfer landed. 6 years of work, real measurable work, were finally converging into something substantial. Not one of them knew. You know, my father continued, his voice rising again, some children never figure out real life. Almost 30, still acting like she's in a dorm room. I let the words pass through me. That version of me, the one he clung to, hadn't existed for years. Harold gestured toward his station. If you'll come with me, I can look up your account. I followed. My father and Ethan trailed close, eager spectators. ID and account card, please, Harold said without looking up. I passed them to him. He typed his movements brisk and practiced. My heart beat steadily, not from fear but from anticipation, not from dread but from the certainty that today marked a turn they never saw coming. My father leaned in, lowering his voice with feigned concern. This is going to be embarrassing. I told you to let me manage your finances. I focused instead on Harold's expression. The first signs of hesitation flickered across his face. His fingers paused over the keyboard. His brow furrowed slightly. This may take a moment, he said quietly. Ethan smirked. Here we go. I said nothing. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. My work, the years of quiet labor, the sacrifices and choices would speak soon enough. Harold blinked at the screen. Then he looked at me, and the shift was unmistakable uncertainty, recalibration, something beginning to crack his assumption. Miss Cole, he said finally, I'm going to need to verify a few things before we proceed. The account data is more complex than I initially anticipated. My father pounced. Is her account frozen? I knew it. But Harold wasn't listening to him anymore. He was looking at me, really looking, as if seeing someone he hadn't expected. And I felt the first crack forming in the narrative my family had built around me for 30 years. Harold picked up the phone and dialed an internal extension. His voice was low controlled, but I caught fragments. Verification protocols. Tier classification. Requires secondary review. The tension rippled outward, drawing the attention of the surrounding tellers. A small crowd didn't form, but the air changed. People can always sense when a routine moment becomes something else. My father exhaled sharply. "Harold, what's the problem? This shouldn't take long. Her account isn't complicated." Ethan edged closer, but his smug confidence from earlier had thinned. Instead of mocking me outright again, he leaned toward my father. "Something's off. Maybe the bank's system glitched." His voice tried for smugness, but landed somewhere uncertain. I noticed the shift in him. For a moment, just a flicker, Ethan looked almost uncomfortable, not sympathetic, not yet. But the script wasn't going as expected, and Ethan had always cracked the moment the script changed. Harold hung up the phone. "Miss Cole, I need additional documentation verification of your address, Social Security, and recent business activity." I handed him the folder before he finished listing the items. Years of paperwork discipline had built a reflex: always be prepared for someone to doubt you. He flipped through the documents, his brow tightening as he realized the records were consistent, organized, and complete. This wasn't what he expected, not from the woman who'd walked in quietly behind her father. "Thank you," Harold murmured, though he sounded anything but reassured. The lobby around us had grown quiet again. A woman in a navy blazer watched openly now. Luis, the security guard, drifted a little closer, not out of alarm, but out of curiosity. Even the teller's conversations slowed the rhythm of the bank, adjusting to the growing strain at Harold's station. "Miss Cole," Harold said, clearing his throat, "can you briefly explain the origin of these deposits? Their frequency and scale fall above most independent contractors' averages. My agency manages SEO strategy for businesses, local, regional, and corporate, performance-based contracts, long-term partnerships, recurring retainers. Everything is conducted remotely." Harold processed that slowly, his eyes tracing the deposit history again. He wasn't shocked. This time he was analyzing, recalibrating, trying to reconcile what he assumed with what he now saw. "And these clients, all ongoing?" he asked. "All ongoing," I said. "Most of them for years." My father scoffed under his breath. "Anyone can claim clients on the internet." Harold didn't answer him. He opened a separate internal panel on his screen, rechecking metadata, dates, contract identifiers. He picked up the phone again. "Compliance. Yes, I need someone to assist with verification. No, not fraud, pre-clearance review." The words "not fraud" made my father stiffen. Ethan frowned, arms dropping to his sides. For a moment he looked uncertain, genuinely uncertain, as if watching something he couldn't categorize. "Why are you talking about compliance? She hasn't done anything." Harold continued. "These figures require tiered authorization. The account classification doesn't match her existing profile. I need confirmation before I proceed." He wasn't accusing me. He was trying not to make a mistake that more than anything revealed how real the numbers on the screen were. When he hung up, Harold looked at me with something new in his expression, not the dismissive glance from earlier, but a kind of cautious recognition. "Miss Cole, if the upcoming transfer is as large as the system indicates, you'll require a higher operating limit. It appears your account has outgrown the standard tier." My father blinked, visibly thrown. He wasn't prepared for the absence of mockery. Ethan started to speak, then stopped. He looked at me, really looked, and for a brief second, something flickered across his face. Confusion, doubt. Maybe the first faint recognition that he had been wrong about something fundamental. Harold cut through the silence. "I've requested the regional director's clearance. She's on her way down." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's jaw tightened, as though preparing for impact. Ethan's bravado had evaporated entirely, leaving something raw or confusion, tinged with the beginning of dread. Whatever they believed the bank, the institution they respected, was now dealing with me on terms they had never imagined. The soft click of the executive elevator landing on the lobby floor broke through the heavy silence. Conversation stilled instantly, as if the entire bank had been holding its breath for this moment. Harold straightened in a way that had nothing to do with pride. It was preparation bracing for scrutiny from someone with the authority to unravel his every decision. My father leaned toward Ethan. "This is ridiculous. No regional director comes down for a routine account." His words were sharp, but uncertainty edged his tone. Ethan swallowed. "Maybe the bank thinks she's—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a woman whose presence reset the room. Claudia Reyes walked with quiet certainty, no wasted motion, no hesitation, the kind of authority that doesn't need to be announced. Her eyes swept the lobby, once gathering context in a single pass before locking onto Harold. "Mr. Benton," she said, her tone smooth but unyielding, "you requested my intervention." There was no shock on her face, no pale terror like Harold's earlier hesitation. She assessed the situation with a strategic calm that made the entire room recalibrate. My father visibly straightened, suddenly aware of the power standing in front of him. Harold cleared his throat. "Yes, Ms. Reyes, I believed there were inconsistencies in the account profile, and we'll review that privately," she said, cutting through his fumbling explanation. Her attention shifted to me. "Miss Cole," she said with a professional courtesy Harold had never offered, "I understand you're here for a limit adjustment." My father took a step forward. "She will not speak to you alone. I am her father." Claudia lifted a hand, a gesture neither rude nor dismissive, but absolute in its authority. "Account matters are confidential. Only the account holder may participate." The words struck my father harder than any reprimand. For decades he had held himself as the arbiter of what I was capable of, the final authority on my choices. Hearing someone in power declare a boundary he could not cross carved a fracture down the center of his certainty. "Miss Cole," Claudia said, her voice steady, "please follow me." I rose, passing my father without a glance. His hand twitched as if to stop me, but Luis, the security guard, subtly shifted position, a silent indication that the rules had changed. Inside the consultation room, Claudia gestured for me to sit, while Harold hovered behind her, a man awaiting a verdict. She pulled up my account with a confidence born of expertise, not assumption. Her eyes scanned the data page after page, each movement measured. She wasn't shocked. She was analyzing the financial pattern of someone whose business had outgrown the assumptions placed upon her. "Your revenue history is strong," she said, her tone purely factual. "Diversified income streams, consistent quarterly growth, and projected wire activity consistent with a corporate contract." Harold shifted. Claudia didn't look at him, but the air around him chilled. "What prompted your escalation?" she asked quietly. Harold hesitated. The account didn't match the expected profile for a customer of her." He stopped, realizing the trap in the words. Claudia turned her head slightly. "Of her what?" Silence. The kind that exposes the truth more effectively than accusation. "This is not a system issue," Claudia said, closing the tablet. "It is an issue of assumption." She faced me fully. "Miss Cole, I apologize for the treatment you received. You are entitled to confidentiality and respect, and neither was upheld today." The words pierced deeper than the apology itself. Respect, something my family had denied me long before Harold ever saw my name on a screen. I looked down at my worn-out shoes for a moment. They had carried me through 6 years of building something real. They had absorbed every dismissal, every doubt, every late night. And now in this room with this woman acknowledging my worth, they felt lighter somehow. "We'll finish your limit adjustment now," Claudia continued, "and we will correct the internal error that led to this situation." She did not mean a software error. From the glass partition I could see my father watching, his posture, rigid, his expression struggling to reconcile the scene unfolding before him. He had come here to witness my humiliation. Instead, he was witnessing the collapse of the narrative he had built around me. Years of dismissal were dissolving in real time. Claudia finalized the adjustment. "The regional director is the highest authority at this branch. Moving forward, your account will be handled accordingly." "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded. "You built something credible, Miss Cole. Don't shrink simply because others fail to see it." Her words landed with the clarity of truth. When she opened the consultation room door, Harold remained behind, small in the shadow of his mistake. But my father was waiting. Not triumphant, not mocking, staring as if he no longer recognized the daughter he had spent years underestimating. And I simply stepped past him into the widening space between who I had been and who I had finally become. The lobby outside the consultation room had gone unnaturally still. Even through the glass partitions, I sensed the shift, an entire bank recalibrating around the realization that its assumptions no longer fit the situation unfolding inside. Claudia led us to a second consultation room, larger, more private. She closed the door behind us with a deliberate quietness, the kind that signaled the beginning of something definitive. She took the seat across from Harold, her posture composed but unyielding. "Mr. Benton," she said evenly, "walk me through your decision from the moment Miss Cole approached your station." Harold's hands tightened around the pen he held. She requested a balance verification and a limit adjustment, routine. But when the account data displayed, it didn't align with the expected profile. "And what definition of expected did you apply?" Claudia asked. He hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer now carried consequences. I believed the discrepancy required further review. Claudia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Review is appropriate when evidence suggests risk, but you escalated without evidence. You escalated because the client did not visually match your internal assumption of financial success. He exhaled sharply, the sound of a man bracing against his own failing logic. She turned to me next, her expression shifting. Not pity, not surprise, but recognition. "Miss Cole, tell me again about your business. Not for verification, for clarity." I gave her the concise version, 6 years of building an SEO agency from scratch. The long nights, the early rejections, the eventual contracts, the steady growth. As I spoke, Claudia's attention didn't drift. She listened like someone assessing potential, not checking for flaws. Behind the glass, my father was immobile, his expression a mask of fractured certainty. Ethan stood beside him, but something had shifted in his posture. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't even defensive. He looked almost thoughtful, as if something I'd said was finally registering. "Your revenue pattern is strong," Claudia said, turning again to the tablet. "Consistent, diversified, methodical. Exactly what we expect from an independent consultant operating at a high level." "Thank you," I said quietly. "You earned this," she replied. The simple statement hit harder than the apology she offered earlier, not because of who said it, but because no one in my family had ever used the word earned in relation to me. Claudia glanced toward Harold. "Your role is to interpret data, not invent narratives to fit your assumptions. You bypassed 2 verification steps and initiated the highest level review without cause. My intention was caution," Harold said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Caution," she said, "requires evidence, not instinct." He lowered his eyes. Claudia turned back to me. "Your account is being upgraded immediately. I'll authorize elevated transfer capacity and assign a direct liaison to handle your commercial needs. No further delays." Her efficiency felt like tangible justice. A soft knock came at the glass. Louise stood outside, motioning that my father was raising his voice again. "Let him be," I said. "He's not part of this conversation." Claudia gave a small, approving nod before continuing. "Miss Cole, you handled this with composure. You presented clear documentation. You offered information when asked and never attempted to obscure your activity. You've been treated as if your success required explanation. It does not." My throat tightened, but not from emotion I couldn't control. It was the unfamiliar sensation of being seen accurately. "Mr. Benton," Claudia said, her tone returning to ice, "you will meet with HR to begin the administrative review. Compliance will address the policy breaches." Harold inhaled slowly, as though trying to rebuild dignity from the fragments left on the table. "Understood." Claudia stood, signaling the end of the meeting. She motioned for me to follow her back into the lobby. The moment the door opened, the entire floor shifted again, every gaze turning toward the woman they had just watched walk beside the regional director. My father stepped forward immediately, his mouth half open, searching for the narrative that would let him stay in control. "Rachel, what?" Claudia spoke before he finished. "Miss Cole's account is in excellent standing. The bank will be partnering with her professionally. If you have concerns, sir, you'll need to wait outside the client zone." He had no category for this, No way to reframe it, no script left to use. Ethan looked at me differently now, not the smug superiority from before, not even confusion. Something closer to reassessment, like he was seeing a landscape he'd driven past his entire life but never truly noticed. Claudia extended her hand. "We'll finalize everything shortly, Miss Cole." I shook her hand, feeling the shifting cement in the air around us. My father said nothing. He couldn't. The story he had built about me for my entire life was collapsing piece by piece in the very place he had chosen to demean me, and I simply stepped forward into the space he could no longer control. Claudia stepped out of the consultation room to manage an urgent phone call, leaving me alone with Harold, who was now quietly and methodically placing his personal items into a cardboard box. He didn't look up, his movements slow and defeated. Through the transparent panels separating the consultation room from the main lobby, I watched my father and brother. My father had stopped arguing with Luis and was now pacing a tight, frantic circle. Ethan was staring intently at the floor, occasionally stealing a glance back at me, with an expression that was no longer contemptuous, but profoundly, utterly stunned. The public recognition from the regional director had violently shattered their preconceived notions. The immense cold relief of vindication settled over me. I had not only survived their ambush, but had, through the integrity of my work, commanded the highest respect the institution offered. Claudia returned her executive calm, completely restored. She avoided looking at Harold. "Mr. Benton has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full review," she confirmed, taking her seat. "The findings of Miss Cole's account are clear. All funds are legitimate earned revenue, and the level of scrutiny was entirely unwarranted and based on improper profiling." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate the transparency and the commitment to policy. As for the compensatory gesture, we are formally offering you our highest business tier amenities, dedicated commercial account support, waived transfer fees, and prioritized executive service for 1 year complimentary. It is a material commitment to apologize for the experience and to show our seriousness about our new partnership." I nodded, accepting the tangible proof of their recognition. The financial value was significant, but the real prize was the public, undeniable retraction of the bank's initial dismissal. "I am also authorized to formally present the consulting opportunity." Claudia continued, her tone shifting to crisp business development. "Our current digital engagement strategy requires a specialized SEO audit and long-term implementation plan to compete with rising financial tech firms. I reviewed your portfolio. Your results in scaling regional client visibility are exactly what we require." She slid a detailed project brief across the table. I absorbed the scope, an 18-month contract overseeing digital strategy for an organization with substantial national reach. The compensation package was designed to attract a highly specialized consultant, far exceeding anything I had previously charged. It was an investment based entirely on trust in my competence. "This is highly impressive," I replied, maintaining a steady professional demeanor. "I am confident I can meet these objectives." "We are confident you can too. We want you. Consider the contract fundamentally yours, contingent on your formal acceptance of the legal terms." Harold, finishing packing his box, looked up, his expression a defeated mixture of professional shame and quiet, undeniable awe at the scale of the contract being offered to the woman he had just profiled. I stood and walked over to the clear glass wall. My father was now arguing intensely with Ethan, his hands slicing the air in desperate search of a rational explanation for what he had just witnessed. They were attempting to rationalize the irrational, that the family failure could not possibly be the bank's prize client. They thought I was in here being reprimanded, perhaps facing legal action. They were waiting for the moment they could swoop in and rescue the failure they had always believed in. "Do you wish for me to have them escorted from the premises now?" Claudia asked, her voice low. "No," I repeated, watching them. "They need to see the conclusion of this transaction." Claudia nodded, respecting the profound personal validation this final moment represented. We finalized the papers for the account upgrade when the system confirmed the new business tier status. Claudia turned to me. "Are you ready, Miss Cole? Everything is complete." "Almost," I said. "I have one last question. When you first looked at my data, you saw the same discrepancy Harold saw. Why did you choose respect instead of suspicion?" Claudia paused, leaning back. "Because I learned long ago that the loudest voices in the room often belong to the emptiest accounts. And conversely, the most valuable assets often prefer to operate in quiet competence. Your success. Miss Cole doesn't depend on what shoes you wear. It depends on your work, and your work very clearly speaks for itself." The validation resonated deeper than any corporate offer. "I'm ready," I said, feeling the immense weight of old expectations lift completely. Claudia opened the door. My father immediately lunged, his body language aggressive, his mouth already forming a command. "Miss Cole?" Claudia said, her voice ringing clearly across the expensive lobby, stopping my father instantly. "Thank you for your business. Your premium business tier account is now active, and we look forward to finalizing our commercial partnership agreement this week." My father froze mid-step, his jaw hanging open. Ethan stared in silent, sickened shock. I stood there in my worn-out shoes looking at them. I was no longer their daughter. I was a valued client of the institution they respected. They had no idea what to do next. The executive review of Harold Benton's conduct was immediately convened in a conference room on the second floor, a setting designed to be severe and final. Claudia led the way, followed by Patricia and James from compliance and myself. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the overhead light like dark water. I took a seat near the window, the quiet authority of the room, a stark contrast to the chaos below. I was exhausted, but alert. This was the moment of full accountability. Claudia stood at the head of the table. "The purpose of this review is twofold: to ensure Miss Cole receives the highest level of compensatory service, and to determine the precise policy violations committed by Mr. Benton during this transaction." Patricia began the formal review, reviewing Harold's internal memos. Mr. Benton's escalation was based entirely on a subjective profile inconsistency. This violates 3 specific internal guidelines regarding non-discriminatory service delivery, including the requirement for tangible evidence of suspicious activity before initiating a fraud review. James, the mid-level manager, who had initially offered a tepid defense for Harold, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. To be fair, Miss Reyes-Harold's intent was to be overly cautious with a large, seemingly unexpected deposit. He simply misjudged the profile match. Misjudged the profile, or misjudged the professional capabilities of a woman who doesn't conform to his arbitrary visual standard of wealth. Claudia's voice remained quiet, but carried devastating force. "Miss Cole, please articulate the professional and personal impact of Mr. Benton's actions during the initial interaction." I leaned forward, choosing my words precisely. "The professional impact is that for an hour, your bank treated my legitimate, profitable business like a criminal enterprise. This forced delay potentially risked a large wire transfer that was scheduled for tomorrow morning." I continued, letting the personal offense resonate. "The emotional impact is the reinforcement of a message I have received my entire life, that my efforts are suspect, my success is conditional, and my professional worth is decided by a man's arbitrary judgment. I maintain meticulous records precisely because I knew a man like Mr. Benton would eventually question me. He wasn't being cautious. He was actively attempting to put me back in the box my family built for me." The silence that followed was profound. Patricia's pen scratched audibly on her pad as she transcribed my statement. "Your procedures are meant to be a safeguard," I concluded. "When they are weaponized by personal bias, they don't protect the bank. They actively perpetuate the very discrimination the bank claims to reject. Mr. Benton's failure was a failure of professional character, not simple diligence." Claudia concluded the official review. "The findings are unambiguous. The conduct exhibited was discriminatory, violated core policy, and constitutes gross professional negligence. Mr. Benton's suspension is confirmed pending formal termination proceedings." The vindication was sharp. It was the system finally and definitively working in favor of the meritocracy I believed in. Claudia waited for Patricia and James to gather their files and exit the room. "Miss Cole, the bank wishes to move forward. Beyond the business tier upgrade, we are prepared to offer you the full SEO contract without further tender. This is a highly valued engagement for us, and we are offering the upper band compensation package. She pushed the folder closer. We require a strategist who understands the market and can deliver results. Your performance portfolio clearly establishes you as that person, and your integrity under pressure has confirmed our decision. The financial offer was staggering, a massive investment in my future. I will require 48 hours to review the full legal terms, I said, maintaining my composure. But conceptually, I accept this professional partnership. Take the time you need. We will hold the terms firm. Claudia stood her respect, now unqualified and absolute. Thank you, Miss Cole. You have done more to enforce accountability within our walls today than any internal audit ever could. I stood and gathered my portfolio. Looking out the expansive windows, I could see the city stretching below me, a city that no longer intimidated me. My family was still waiting down there, small figures irrelevant to the executive decisions being made up here. I was no longer just proving them wrong. I was now building a future that fundamentally operated outside the orbit of their judgment. The executive elevator descended with a soft, swift hum, carrying me away from the hushed severity of the second-floor review. When the doors opened onto the main lobby, the tension was immediate and absolute. Every head, customers, tellers, security turned in synchronized recognition. I stepped out accompanied by Claudia Reyes, whose presence alone instantly elevated my status beyond question. The transition from suspected customer to valued client was physically palpable. I was no longer an inconvenience. I was an untouchable asset protected by the highest echelon of the institution. My father, who had been anxiously monitoring the elevator, immediately surged forward, his urgency overriding the security guard Luis's attempt to halt him. "Rachel, what in God's name happened up there?" His voice was hoarse, sharp, with unaccustomed panic. "Are they pressing charges? Did they find the mistake with the wiring? You must have gotten a loan. You need to let Dad fix this." Ethan followed his face a roadmap of confusion and fear. "Just tell us the number, Rach. Why did the regional director come down for you?" I stopped. I didn't need to speak. The silence surrounding me was more effective than any argument. Luis, the security guard, stepped in front of my father, a clear line of defense. His posture was no longer casual. It was respectful and firm. "Miss Cole, as a premium tier customer, you are invited to wait in our private client lounge while we arrange transport and finalize documentation." The deliberate use of premium tier and private client lounge was a precise professional statement. Private client lounge. My father's voice cracked in genuine outrage. He looked around the pristine lobby, searching for an ally. "For her, she doesn't even own a suitable handbag. This is an insult. She drives a decade-old car. All premium tier customers receive the same access, sir," Luis said, utterly unmoved. "That is bank policy." Premium tier. Ethan repeated the reality, finally beginning to sink in. His face went slack. "Since when, Rachel? What is this?" I walked past them without a word. Their frantic questions, demands, and attempts to restore their control fell flat, hitting an invisible barrier of my newfound executive status. The private client lounge was a world apart from the main floor. The thick carpet absorbed sound, the soft light was designed to flatter, and the heavy leather chairs promised stability. It was a space designed to confirm status. I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of the last few hours lift from my shoulders. Luis served me a glass of iced sparkling water with a slice of lemon on a silver coaster. "Is there anything else, Miss Cole? I can arrange a taxi or call your driver." "No, thank you, Luis. I'm fine." He paused, lowering his voice again. "I just wanted to say I'm glad. I saw the way Mr. Benton and your family treated you. You handled yourself with immense grace, especially under that pressure." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by his quiet solidarity. I realized that my most loyal witness in that entire fiasco was the security guard, the person who understood status based on conduct, not clothing. I sat in the lounge watching my family through the secure glass panel. My father was now arguing intensely with Ethan, his hands slicing the air, clearly demanding an explanation my brother couldn't provide. Their distress was total. They were trapped in the humiliating position of waiting on the person they had just publicly deemed worthless. I understood then that their frantic questions weren't about my safety. They were purely about their loss of control. My success fundamentally invalidated my father's judgments and stripped Ethan of his easy superiority. Claudia appeared at the lounge entrance, her face radiating professional assurance. "Miss Cole, we've finalized the paperwork and the transfer limits are active. Shall we conclude this now?" "Yes." We crossed the lobby again. My father lunged, unable to contain himself. "Rachel, we are talking now right here." Claudia interposed herself perfectly. "Sir Miss Cole is finalizing a high-level commercial transaction. You have no legal right to intervene or access her information. I must ask you to stand back immediately. I am her father. I demand information on her business." "Miss Cole," Claudia said, turning her attention solely to me, completely isolating him. "Your financial records are impeccable. Your business management is astute. You are an exemplary customer." My father deflated entirely the full force of Claudia's professional authority, neutralizing his bluster. We completed the final signatures. When finished, Claudia extended her hand, her handshake firm and equal. "It has been a privilege, Miss Cole. We look forward to a long and mutually profitable partnership." I walked toward the exit, my head held high. My father and brother were now silent, their confusion total. The glass doors slid open. I paused outside, turning to look back one last time. I looked down at my worn-out shoes, scuffed, practical, and honest. They had carried me through the whole ordeal. They were evidence of my journey, not my lack. I squared my shoulders, and the immense weight of decades of emotional debt finally lifted. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from them utterly free and utterly self-defined. The confrontation was unavoidable. My father's rental sedan screeched to a halt in the parking lot, effectively boxing in my own modest vehicle before I could reach it. "Rachel, stop right there." My father's voice, sharp with unaccustomed panic, cut across the warm asphalt. "You are not leaving until you explain that circus in the bank." I turned, facing them both under the low, slanted afternoon sun. "The circus, Dad," I said, my voice calm and low, "was your own making. I conducted a routine transaction. You chose to publicly mock me. The bank chose to recognize me." "Don't play word games." My father stalked closer. "That woman called you a premium client. She talked about a commercial partnership. What ridiculous facade are you maintaining?" Ethan stood behind him, his suspicion clinging to the belief that I must have inherited a secret trust fund or, worse, committed tax evasion. "You were struggling last year, Rach. You were barely covering your small rent. Don't try to tell us you've suddenly become a mogul." "I was struggling to meet your expectations, not my rent," I corrected. "My apartment was chosen for its low overhead. The money I saved wasn't wasted on appearances. It was reinvested into the business development that built my agency." "The agency is you sitting at a laptop," he sneered. "That is not wealth. That's a glorified hobby that happens to pay for your internet." "It's a hobby," I agreed, letting the condescension hang, "that has secured me a consulting contract from that bank worth more than your annual salary. It's a hobby that requires high-level executive discussions while you were confined to the lobby by a security guard." Ethan flinched. The comparison spoken aloud was devastating. My father's control snapped. He moved right into my personal space, attempting the old, towering intimidation tactic. "If you have this kind of money, it is family money. We raised you. We supported you. You owe us a share." "You did not support me when I was struggling," I stated, completely unmoved by his physical presence. "You actively prophesied my failure. You invested your time, money, and approval exclusively in Ethan while dismissing my every ambition as a childish waste of time. That is not support. That is emotional and financial sabotage. We were trying to provide you with realistic expectations. No, you were trying to ensure I stayed reliably smaller than you. The only problem is I succeeded despite you." He stumbled back a step. Ethan interjected, trying to mediate with a nervous formality. "That is fundamentally unfair, Rachel. We have always wanted the best for you." "The best, Ethan," I countered, looking him directly in the eye, "was for me to remain your backdrop. When was the last time you asked about my work, truly listened to my answer, and accepted that I might be competent? You never asked because it was easier to believe I was failing than to confront the possibility that I succeeded without a single ounce of your help." He had no answer. My father, regaining his fury, attempted his final desperate threat. "Don't you dare walk away from me. If you leave now, you forfeit any future assistance from this family. You are cut off." I paused at my car door, turning back one last time. "I have been cut off for 29 years, Dad. I've built an entire successful career in that void. Your lack of support is not a threat. It is a fact of my life. The difference now is that I no longer require your change, your respect, or your approval." I got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving them frozen, father and son, finally united in their shock and irreversible displacement. I arrived home and sat at my computer. I opened the bank's formal proposal. The numbers were immense, but the true prize was the professional validation. My phone buzzed, Mother's text urging me to call and apologize for embarrassing my father. I responded, "I have nothing to apologize for." He earned the reaction he received. Later that night, the hesitant knock came. Ethan stood in the hallway. "I came to apologize," he said, not meeting my eyes, "for everything at the bank." "Which part specifically?" "All of it. The mocking, the assumption. I didn't know about your agency. I just assumed." "You assumed I was the failure you needed me to be." "That is harsh, Rach. But no, it's not inaccurate." "How did you do it?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. "How did you build something real when Dad constantly told you it was impossible?" "I stopped listening to everyone else's voice," I said, "and I started trusting my own." He nodded, a flicker of genuine introspection in his eyes. "Dad's voice is always in my head telling me who I should be." "I know. It was mine too. It takes time and refusal to get it out." He left, still uncertain, but the apology was real. I closed the door and felt not vindication, but an immense, simple pride. I had survived. I had kept going when everyone expected me to fall, and that was worth more than any number in a bank account. The morning after the bank confrontation brought a quiet clarity to my life. I took an early walk, enjoying the cool, damp air and the solitude. The emotional storm had broken, leaving behind a profound sense of self-reliance. My primary focus returned to work. The imminent bank contract was secured in principle, and my existing client base, stronger than ever, demanded my attention. The family drama, intense as it was, now felt external, secondary, contained. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Sandra from Claudia Reyes's office. "Miss Cole, Claudia is eager to move forward. She would like to confirm your availability for an executive briefing next week. We need to detail the contract scope and introduce you to the integration team." We scheduled the high-level meeting. The reality of the contract, a major strategic partnership secured purely on merit, solidified my new footing. Later that afternoon, the unexpected visitor arrived. There was a tentative knock, and when I opened the door, my mother stood there, her posture unusually hesitant, her eyes holding a deep vulnerability I rarely saw. "May I come in, Rachel? I won't stay long." I stepped aside. She looked around the apartment, not with the old critical pity, but with a new searching curiosity, as if seeing the space and the life within it for the very first time. "Your father is profoundly upset," she stated, sitting gingerly on the edge of my sofa. "He believes you intentionally humiliated him to damage his standing." "He humiliated himself, Mother," I corrected gently but firmly. "I merely presented factual evidence of my life and success. He chose the venue, the public mockery, and the contempt. The embarrassment he feels is a consequence of his choice, not my action." "You know his ways," she pleaded softly. "He feels he loves you, Rachel, in his own difficult way. He just doesn't know how to show it without control. Love does not require a child to shrink for a parent's ego." I stated the words quiet but definite. I needed him to see my worth, and instead, he actively denied it for 3 decades. She looked down at her hands, her voice dropping. I haven't been fair to you. I allowed him to speak over you, to diminish you. I was afraid of the conflict, afraid of what would happen if I stood up to him. She finally looked up, her eyes glistening. That is the truth, Rachel. I chose peace over defending you. I recognize that now, I said. But I can no longer participate in that dynamic. I cannot make myself small to accommodate his expectation of failure. I understand, more than you know. She leaned forward, resting her hand lightly on my arm. I want you to know, Rachel, I am deeply proud of you. What you have built, what you have become, it is more independent and real than anything I ever found the courage to attempt. Her pride, openly and honestly expressed, struck me profoundly. It was the only apology she could truly offer, an admission that her own life had been circumscribed by the very limitations her husband had tried to enforce on me. Thank you, Mother, I said, a knot in my chest loosening slightly. That means everything. She left shortly after the visit, a quiet, tentative acknowledgement that a new, stronger Rachel existed, one who demanded honesty. The rest of the week was consumed by professional preparation. I meticulously prepared for the executive briefing detailing strategy and projections. The meeting with Claudia and her team went flawlessly. We discussed implementation goals and technical integration with seriousness and respect due to a major contractor. We are extremely impressed with your professionalism and vision, Claudia said at the conclusion. The contract terms are non-negotiable on our end as they reflect the value of your deliverables. We hope you will sign. I will, I confirmed instantly. I left the bank feeling a professional confidence that was quickly becoming second nature. My phone buzzed later that evening. Ethan's text, Mom's 60th next week. Traditional family dinner at the house. Dad says it's important we talk. Can you make it? The family was attempting a formal re-engagement. The tension was present, but it was now manageable. I was no longer an insecure child seeking permission. I was a professional operating on my own terms. My reply was brief and certain: I'll be there. Please confirm the time. I was ready. Sunday arrived, bringing a steady gray drizzle. I dressed in simple, comfortable layers. My armor was psychological now. I made a point of lacing up my worn-out sneakers. They were a necessary reminder of where I'd been and who I'd become. The 20-minute drive to my parents' house was spent mentally rehearsing my boundaries. I was attending as an equal, not as a subordinate. My father was waiting at the door, an unusual sight. Rachel, you came. His voice was measured, subdued. The dining room was set formally. My mother, visibly anxious, sat at the table. Ethan was standing, his posture more relaxed than I expected, as if the conversation at my apartment had shifted something in him too. I sat down deliberately, choosing a seat at the center of the table, not the usual peripheral chair. My father began immediately, bypassing pleasantries. The incident at the bank was a misunderstanding. Your conduct in refusing to share information was unacceptable. You deliberately engineered a public scene to embarrass the family. I let the accusations land, waiting for him to finish his prepared script of offense. When he paused, I spoke, my voice calm and unwavering. My refusal to share my financial details is a right, not a weapon. I did not engineer the scene. You chose the venue. You chose the public mockery. I merely stood there and allowed the truth of my success to be revealed. Any embarrassment you felt, Dad, was the natural consequence of your own misplaced contempt. His face flushed a deep crimson. Success. You call sitting alone a computer success? Yes. I confirmed, meeting his hostile gaze. I call securing a major contract with a national financial institution success. I call building a 6-figure business from nothing, without capital or support, success. Ethan shifted in his seat, but didn't pile on. He stayed quiet, watching. That wealth belongs at least partially to this family, my father declared, resorting to the old claim of financial debt. We supported your education. We housed you. You housed me, yes, I agreed. You supported Ethan's ventures. You constantly told me my ambition was worthless. You invested nothing in my professional development. I owe you the respect of a daughter, not the debt of a business partner. You are being dramatic and ungrateful. I am being honest. For the first time, I am telling you the complete, unvarnished truth of our relationship. You demanded failure, and when I refused to comply, you called it betrayal. My father pushed back his chair and stood towering over me in a classic move of physical intimidation. You will not speak to me with this disrespect in my own house. I stood up instantly. I was shorter, but I felt a power that transcended height. Then I will leave your house now, I stated. But the facts of my success and the facts of your refusal to see it will follow me out the door. You cannot escape the truth of what I have built. He hesitated, seeing the finality in my posture. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite fear, but the recognition that his old tactics weren't working. You cannot simply abandon your family, he pleaded, his voice losing its command. I am not abandoning anyone. I am establishing respectful boundaries. There is a difference. Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. Dad, stop. We both turned to look at him. She's right, Ethan continued. We never asked. We never listened. We just assumed she was failing because that's what you always said. He took a breath. I've been thinking about it all week, and I'm tired of pretending she's the problem when we're the ones who never gave her a chance. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at Ethan as if he'd been struck. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how family dinners were supposed to go. I'm not asking you to apologize right now, I said to my father. I'm asking you to stop pretending I owe you something for succeeding despite you. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. My mother reached across the table and touched his arm. Sit down, she said softly. Please. He sat. Not because he agreed, but because the ground had shifted beneath him and he didn't know where else to stand. I came here tonight because I believe families can change, I said. But change requires honesty, and honesty requires you to see me, actually see me for who I am now, not who you decided I was 20 years ago. My father stared at his plate. He didn't apologize, he didn't agree, but he didn't argue either. It wasn't a resolution, it wasn't healing, but it was the first moment of silence that felt like possibility instead of defeat. The weeks that followed the tense family dinner were strangely quiet. Not the suffocating quiet of avoidance, nor the shaky quiet of a family fractured beyond repair, but the tentative quiet of something unfamiliar space, a space where my father wasn't demanding, where I wasn't shrinking, and where we both seemed to be learning what it meant not to reenact old patterns. Work became my anchor. The bank project advanced quickly. The team trusted my expertise, and I found myself stepping into rooms I had once convinced myself I didn't deserve. But late at night, when I shut my laptop, the emotional residue remained the soft ache of a daughter still carrying the debris of old battles. 2 weeks after the dinner, my father called. I almost didn't answer. But something in me recognized that declining would only drag the old narrative forward, avoidance, fear, miscommunication. And I was tired of living inside stories that didn't belong to me anymore. When I picked up, his voice was rough. Rachel. Dad. A pause. Not the angry kind. Not the, I'm preparing my argument kind. Just unsure. I've been thinking, he said. Each word sounded heavy, as if he'd practiced them, but still wasn't sure how they would land. I believe I have been profoundly unfair to you, for a long time. I didn't rescue him with reassurance. I didn't feel the silence. I simply waited. I had a vision of what success was supposed to look like, he continued, and when your path didn't resemble it, I assumed you were lost. I didn't consider that I might be the one who was wrong. The admission hit me in a strangely gentle way, not like a shock, but like the soft click of something finally moving into place. You punished me for not conforming, I said quietly, not accusing, just naming the truth. Yes. Another pause. I did. It wasn't perfect accountability. It wasn't a poetic speech. But it was real. And for the first time in years, it wasn't coded in defensiveness or superiority. What can I do now? He asked. I want a relationship with you. A real one. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was deciding. For perhaps the first time, the decision was entirely mine. "I can't answer that yet," I said. "But I know what I won't do. I won't return to the dynamic where I'm the child who must justify her existence." "I understand." "I need time," I added. "Space to see whether the change you're offering is consistent." "I'll earn it," he said. The phrase trembled slightly, as if unfamiliar to him. "Then we can try," I said, giving him what I could not, more not less. After the call, I sat on my sofa for a long moment. Not crying, not angry, just processing. Healing wasn't a switch. It was a slowly untangling thread, and for the first time, I felt it pulling in the right direction. A week later, my father called again. "I found an article about SEO," he said awkwardly. "I didn't understand most of it, but I thought maybe you could explain it to me sometime." It was small, almost comically small, but it was an effort. "Sure," I said. "We can talk about it." But healing isn't linear. 3 weeks after that first apology, I visited my parents' house for a casual Sunday lunch. The conversation started well enough. My mother asked about the bank project Ethan mentioned he'd been reading about digital marketing, but then my father made a comment. "You know," he said, cutting into his steak, "if you'd told us about your business earlier, we could have helped. I have contacts. I could have opened the doors." The old reflex flared in my chest. The assumption that I needed his help, the implication that my success was incomplete without his involvement. "I didn't need your contacts," I said carefully. "I built this myself. I'm just saying," he continued, not hearing the edge in my voice. "Family should support each other. You could have come to me." "I did come to you," I said. "Years ago, you told me I was wasting my time." He waved his hand dismissively. "That was different. You weren't serious then." "I was always serious. You just didn't believe me." The table went quiet. My mother looked down at her plate. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. "I'm trying here, Rachel. Can't you see that—" "I can see that you're trying," I said slowly. "But trying doesn't mean rewriting history. It doesn't mean pretending you supported me when you didn't." "So what do you want from me?" His voice rose slightly. I apologized. "I'm making an effort. What more do you need?" I set down my fork. "I need you to stop acting like your effort erases what happened. It doesn't. We can move forward, but we can't pretend the past didn't exist." He stared at me, frustration, and something else, maybe shame, flickering across his face. "This is exhausting," he muttered. "Yes," I agreed. "It is, but it's also necessary." He didn't respond. The meal finished in uncomfortable silence. When I left, Ethan walked me to my car. "That was hard to watch," he said. "It was harder to live through," I replied. He nodded slowly. "He's trying, in his own broken way." "I know, but trying doesn't mean I have to accept half measures." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than any of us." "Thanks," I said. "That actually means something." The next month came with unexpected growth. My work expanded rapidly. My visibility in the industry rose. I attended a networking luncheon and realized I no longer needed to hide behind technical jargon or quiet competence. I belonged there. I spoke openly, confidently. When the Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak on a panel about resilience, I nearly declined out of old habit, but I didn't. I accepted. On the evening of the event, standing backstage under the warm lights, I felt an echo of the girl who used to memorize defenses, explanations, and reasons why she was not a failure. That girl hovered at my shoulder, uncertain, and I told her silently, "We're okay now." When I walked onto the stage, the auditorium quieted. Hundreds of women, professionals, entrepreneurs, mothers, students watched me. I didn't give them numbers or strategies. I gave them the truth. The girl with the worn-out shoes, the dismissive family, the moment at the bank where the world shifted. I spoke of the emotional toll of being underestimated by the people who mattered most, of the quiet, persistent work that no one saw, and of the day I finally understood that I wasn't required to be small for anyone's comfort. When the applause came, It wasn't polite. It was thunderous. After the event, a woman approached me, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I've been living half a life because my family convinced me I wasn't capable. Your story, it changes things. I hope it gives you permission," I said. "Permission to trust yourself." That night, walking to my car under the city lights, I realized something profound. My story wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about reclamation. It was about a voice I spent years burying, finally taking its rightful place. And healing. Real healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about saying I'm no longer defined by it. The contract with the bank wrapped more smoothly than I had imagined. The integration phase ended without drama, and the leadership team sent me a handwritten note expressing how much they valued my precision. That small gesture, simple as it was, felt like confirmation of everything I had fought to build. Not for anyone else, for myself. But even with the growing stability of my business, a soft ache lingered, something unfinished, not jagged anymore, just waiting for its proper place. A week before my mother's birthday, I opened the closet to pull out a sweater. My eyes landed on the worn-out shoes tucked in the corner. I hadn't thrown them away. I couldn't. They had carried me through job interviews, midnight deadlines, grocery runs, when my bank account barely held enough to stay afloat, and the humiliation at Summit First Bank. They were the one witness that never judged me. I picked them up. The soles had thinned to almost nothing. The fabric had softened into a fragile, familiar texture. For the first time, I noticed that they smelled faintly of rain and old sidewalks. Something inside me shifted, quiet, decisive. On Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. The relationship with my father remained complicated. There were good days and difficult ones, progress and setbacks. But we were trying. Imperfectly, awkwardly, but genuinely trying. I placed the worn-out shoes on the passenger seat. They didn't belong in a closet tonight. They had one more journey to make. The house was warm when I arrived. My mother greeted me with wide, grateful eyes. My father stood nearby, his posture softer than it used to be. He'd stopped trying to control every conversation. He asked questions now instead of making declarations. It wasn't transformation, it was effort. And effort, I'd learned, was the beginning of change. Dinner unfolded gently. The tension wasn't gone, but it had softened into something workable, human. My father asked about my clients, about the speaking engagement, about my plans for the next quarter. The questions were clumsy sometimes, but they were genuine. After dessert, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said, about how I never asked about your work." I waited. "I still don't fully understand what you do," he admitted, "but I'd like to, if you're willing to explain it to me sometime." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an absolution. But it was something I'd never expected from him: humility. "I'd like that," I said. When I returned to my car, the street was empty. A soft drizzle had begun to fall, the kind that leaves silver threads floating through streetlights. I looked at the leather boots on my feet, then at the worn-out shoes lying on the seat beside me. A strange certainty settled in my chest. I slipped off the boots. I slid my feet into the worn-out shoes. They felt almost weightless now, as if time had hollowed out the burden they once carried. I stepped out into the drizzle. The pavement gleamed beneath the amber glow of the street lamps. The rain was cool, not harsh. Each drop felt like a memory dissolving. I walked slowly down the quiet suburban street. No audience, no confrontation. Just me, the night, and the shoes that had witnessed every chapter I had fought through. As the fabric absorbed the rain, I thought about the girl who once wore these shoes because she had no choice. The girl who accepted mockery because she didn't yet understand her own worth. The girl who stood in a bank lobby while her own father tried to shrink her into invisibility. I wasn't walking away from her. I was walking with her. Because healing isn't a clean cut. It's a merging, a recognition that every painful step had carried purpose. By the time I circled back to my car, the shoes had grown heavier with water. I stood beneath the streetlight and looked down at them, soaked, softened, barely holding together. They had given everything, and I was finally ready to let them rest. I removed them gently, placing them in the trunk, not as trash, as a memory. I put my boots back on, feeling the difference, immediately firm, steady forward-facing. When I sat behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. I breathed. I realized then that my father didn't need to be fully transformed for my healing to be real. His change, partial and imperfect, was enough to create a space where I no longer had to choose between truth and peace. I could have both. When I reached my apartment, I carried the shoes upstairs, still dripping slightly. I didn't put them back in the closet. I laid them on a towel near the window where the moonlight touched them. They had done their job. Now it was my turn. Before going to bed, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. Not a blog post. Not a public declaration. Just words for myself. I wrote, "Some journeys don't end with applause. They end quietly at the moment you realize you no longer need the world to understand your path." The worn-out shoes carried me through doubt, rejection, and years of invisible labor. They witnessed every failure and every small victory. They never judged me for what I lacked or what I couldn't yet prove. Tonight, I walked in them one last time, in the rain, alone, and I understood something I couldn't have understood before. The girl who wore those shoes wasn't weak. She was building, and the woman who took them off tonight isn't finished. She's just beginning. I saved the document and closed my laptop. I glanced once more at the worn-out shoes, pale and waterlogged in the moonlight. Their job was finished. Mine was just beginning.